Welcome to RCast, the official podcast of the RChain Cooperative. RChain is a complete concurrent blockchain platform designed for maximum efficiency at minimal computational and environmental costs by utilizing proof of stake. Beyond our platform, our investment partners, Reflective Ventures and Pythia, fund organizations that are working within our core mission statement to create a better world by enabling social coordination in robust, secure, and scalable ways. I'm Derek Barris, the Director of Content for RChain. Each week on RCast, I'll be talking with the founders of our portfolio companies, as well as co-op members, staff, and other figures in the RChain ecosystem about the most pressing issues in blockchain today. Please check out rchain.coop to learn more about the platform, our community, our validator sale, and information on becoming a member.
I want to balance between, we're patriotic, not just to the U.S., but to the populace of the world. We're going to change everything. We can change, if you take a look at elections from end to end, there's about 7 different steps. We can only control 3 of those steps. I can't control the misinformation that's going on out there. I can't control if a foreign agency is trying to come in and persuade people through fake news. We can't control lies that one side or the opposition or the mudslinging or the negative press. We can't control any of that. What we can control is the steps of the election, whether it's the registration process or all the way to the post-election analytics. That's the space we can control. And I get really frustrated when I go and literally hear people talking about blockchain curing cancer. No, it won't. What it will do is perhaps safeguard the whole supply chain for medicine. What it will do perhaps is make it better, quicker, easier, and more in line with results. But it's not going to cure cancer. That still takes human intervention to come up with these formulas.
As I'm sitting here producing the podcast, an article from Vox came over my Twitter feed. It's called "The Midterms Are Already Hacked. You Just Don't Know It Yet." And it's about an incident that took place last year in Knoxville, Tennessee, that occurred during an election. And I'll read. One county technician, dumbfounded by the whoosh of code rocketing across the screen, somberly took out his phone and began to film it. The assault was being launched from 65 countries, a legion of zombie computers pressed into service by the attack's architects. Finally, the barrage intensified so much that after 15 minutes, the server succumbed and crashed. Now, if you keep reading, as it turned out, that was just a diversion for the attackers, which were based in 2 countries, the UK and the Ukraine, to enter into the system, which they successfully did. Needless to say, security isn't exactly at the top of our mind right now, even though it's something that we're seeing being breached every single day. In the conversation I'm having today with Carl Curl, the co-founder of Govurn, govurn.com, who you heard a moment ago discussing fake news and the role of blockchain in the voting process, and Jonathan Alexander, the founder and director of NetVote, netvote.io. These are both RChain portfolio companies that are recent additions to our platform. Is that I recently read George Gilder's book, Life After Google, where he makes the argument that if you're a technology company and security isn't the very foundation of your architecture, then your architecture needs to be replaced. We've focused so much on monetization that we forgot that privacy and security are really of utmost importance. And there's no better indication of this than what's going on in our election process and the voting processes that are occurring around the country and around the world right now. Now, don't take it from me. I happen to have been at the Crypto Invest Summit in downtown Los Angeles last week. As Carl was, we didn't get to meet in person there, unfortunately, but we both happened to be in the audience during the keynote speak by Steve Wozniak. You might have heard of him. He co-founded a company called Apple a long time ago, so he knows a bit about technology. And during the Q&A session, someone asked him what he thought was going to be the breakout DApp or technology in blockchain that would really bring it to mainstream adoption. And he basically said he's not going to venture a guess. He thinks every industry in some capacity can use blockchain. So he didn't want to speculate on that. And then a woman next in line asked her question, and I'm going to wind it back a little just so you can hear Steve's response near the end of that first question that I just mentioned.
So patience is the most important thing. Work, whatever you do. Apple was this way with a lot of products. Make it so, take extra time. Don't rush it out as quick as you can. Take extra time and make it so good. It is near perfection. You won't have to change it very much in the future. And so it's worth being patient, taking that time. Make it that much good. If you can make it one step easier, simpler, or more like something that humans already do more naturally. Yeah.
Hi, Steve.
By the way, I do hope for voting, though. Blockchain to be involved in that.
I immediately tweeted that out from the RChain account, and Carl responded within moments. And it was one of those moments where you can hear in the room that it wasn't a huge reaction, but if your head is in the game and you're trying to solve the problem of voting insecurity and make it easier for people to vote, not harder, which has unfortunately been the trend in America in certain districts of late, which I'll get into in our discussion coming up, then finding ways to make digital identity easier, which I talk about on RCast 1 with Chris Boscolo from Life ID, and then making the voting process easier, like, say, from your phone, which is tied into your digital identity biometrically, so there's a way to be able to prove you are who you are and you get one vote, then we need to pursue these because the system isn't working. There are too many problems going on right now with voter suppression and voting hacking and hacking in general. And as Carl mentioned in the beginning, no, blockchain's not going to cure cancer. There's a lot of things blockchain's not going to do, but it does address the security issue more efficiently than anything we have right now. And sure, the technology isn't quite there yet, but that's the case with every technology. It's a process, and we're seeing this process unfold, and we're seeing the problems that we're having, and we're experiencing a lot of very well-intentioned people trying to address those problems and make it better for us. And that's what this podcast is about. I talked to Jonathan from NetVote first, and then Carl from Govern afterwards, and that's the order that I interviewed them in over the course of 2 days, so I'm just going to present it that way. Now, I'm not going to get too much into the technology because they explain their roles, NetVote being sort of the back-end foundation of the blockchain architecture, whereas Govern being the forward-facing, more interactive phase. And it's actually quite perfect to present it that way because at RChain we had our board of directors elections last week, and NetVote and Govern were the companies that created the foundation for all members to vote on. And that's the basic idea of our entire ecosystem. That's what it means. We're working together to create solutions. Don't take it from me. I think Steve Wozniak has a better track record that you can trust. So let's hear a little bit of what he was talking about. How will blockchain address the issues we have with voting today? We'll start off with Jonathan. Voting is an ambitious problem to tackle. What made you want to look for a solution to this problem?
Personally, the troubles that we see in public voting that have become well publicized drove me to have interest in working on a better solution that would allow individuals to vote and participate more easily, which can come through accessibility, mobile access, but also that we can have more trust in the results and the preservation of the results and provide a system that can be audited and that we know can be tamper-free. So having been interested in just the overall social problems around these issues that we've seen in voting, and then having become, 4 or 5 years ago, quite familiar with blockchain and its capabilities, I became personally interested in working on solving the social problem and what is a very important societal problem by applying blockchain to elections and voting.
One of the things that jumped out on your site is that you're trying to help solve the problem of participation in the first place. And that is something that is constantly talked about every election cycle. And especially right now, that's a big topic of conversation. Why aren't people coming out to vote? So how would blockchain address that problem, or NetVote specifically?
I think there's two key aspects to increasing participation, two key technical aspects to increasing participation. In the end, if people aren't interested or don't care, we can't really solve that problem. But one of the keys is accessibility and the ability and ease of use and ease of access in voting. And we all know now that we have a lot of capabilities across the internet and mobile networks where we do a lot of consumers and individuals transact all kinds of commerce and banking and financial transactions today from mobile locations. While I don't in front of me have any data about the increase in transactions as a result of that, I think it's quite clear that in countries where individuals have that access, the number of transactions actually has increased because of ease of access. I don't think voting is any different, that if we can simplify access and make access mobile, that would eliminate a lot of barriers and increase participation. But to do that, there's critical concerns around identity and identifying participants, and then being able to verify that. And there are also concerns for participants around the accuracy of voting and the protection of privacy, and making sure that there are also protections against coercion. Blockchain itself is not by itself the solution to all those problems, but with blockchain and with cryptographic security and kind of other elements layered on top of blockchain, that we can solve those problems, and we can make it that people could vote mobile. We could be assured of identity, kind of approved participants are involved, and that we can have assurances on both sides that the voting is not tampered with, that the voting is recorded as cast, and that people have privacy protections. That's where NetVote comes in, actually, is that, it's not just the blockchain, it's not just any smart contract, but it's a solution that has to be there that provides these different elements.
There are a few instances right now in the current election cycle about voter suppression techniques that are happening. And the identity problem is a serious one. I know in my 1Password account, I have, I think, 110 passwords just to be able to get to all of the various entities that I log into. And that's kind of insane. But the bigger question is, if there are parties in power that would rather suppress votes, how do you get a buy-in from government, from the local level to the national level, to start to consider mobile voting as a viable option?
Part of our strategy is that there's a couple of ways that we hope over time, and I actually believe quite confidently over time, that we'll begin to build awareness and confidence in these capabilities. And I think that's the key, is to build awareness and confidence, show people the advantages, and then through public opinion, begin to lead those who are resistant to capitulate and adopt. The strategy is there are a couple angles to the strategy. One is to take part in many pilots, and I think that we will see, and we are starting to see, pilot elections and smaller organizations who understand the benefits. We, as we all know, we just conducted the RChain co-op election using blockchain technology, and we went through a lot of internal discussion early about the benefits and what it provided, and the security and the different capabilities that we talked about. But because we did that, it was able to be completely mobile and yet completely anonymous and completely tamper-proof. And I know we had people voting all over the world. So I think we'll begin to see pilots, and that'll help us create the basis to build awareness and educate people. I think that organizations like Govern and ourselves are also going to make part of our mission to educate. And as people become more educated and aware, then I think we will see more organizations adopt it. And as more adopt it, or more communities begin to adopt it, then that will build to larger scale. The good news, the other thing that I'd mention, is that there is a real actual cost benefit to this technology. Elections on larger scales are very expensive to run, and so many governments who want to have or who do have democratic elections, they struggle to pay for the elections, and it actually is almost impossible for some of them to audit the elections or to do post-election audit because it's so expensive. So I think part of the adoption will begin to come from not only the awareness of the benefits of the technology, but the fact that for some, it will be more affordable. And they'll look at the potential benefits of the technology along with the reduced cost to implement elections, and that'll start to drive some adoption too.
Right. I remember when the Trump administration had appointed some state officials to the federal government, they certain states, and I forget which ones, but they didn't actually have the budget for the elections that had to take place in order to fill those seats.
Money will lead the way with some organizations, absolutely. And the amount of money that is spent on elections in the United States is mind-boggling. I mean, we're in hundreds of billions of dollars.
So one of the things that you say on the site is you are providing or going to provide new and better ways to engage voters. And you did mention that making it mobile, making it easier is part of that. But are there other plans on engaging with voters that you're looking into?
Well, it is very controversial, but we have been building into the platform a capability to offer voters some kind of reward for participation. So obviously not a reward for voting a specific way, but reward for participation. This is not commonly done. There are some countries in the world who have penalties for non-participation. So most people know that Australia fines you if you don't vote, and they do have a high participation rate. It could be possible to, for example, in the United States, if you go to a polling place and you vote in locales that have polling places, a lot of times you'll walk out, they'll hand you a sticker, and you can wear your I voted sticker. If we do electronic voting and we use blockchain, it would be possible to return a token, for example, to the voter, and the token would be acquired by participating in the election by casting a vote, and maybe the token can be tradable for something. Maybe it's tradable for $5 off your taxes, or maybe it's tradable for something to the election body or whoever's running the election. Maybe it's tradable for something else. What I'd say is this, that this is a capability that could be implemented. It's something that we've enabled because we think it's worth talking about. Organizations running elections, participation is key, and finding ways to incent participation, that maybe creative thinking is warranted. And of course, many elections are not government elections, right? They're private organizations or they're even public groups that want to engage their consumers. So there could be different models where different things apply.
I think that's fascinating. Oftentimes, and this happens in many different industries or religions, cultures, where things are done one way. And so for democracy, you think you should vote just purely out of partaking in the democratic process. But there's always the argument that you have to address the culture that you're actually living in. And so many of these platforms have to gamify in order to adopt some sort of participation. And another example of that is incentivizing through tokens. So if that would actually raise participation, I think that would be a fascinating way to go about it.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with you. I think that there are very legitimate concerns that you have to take into account about if you gave out $5 to every voter, would you then incentivize people to go fraudulently? Now maybe you incentivize somebody to figure out a way that they can cast 1,000 fraudulent votes so that they can make, $5,000, right? So that's the concern is that now you're creating a situation where people will try to defraud you more. But if you go back to, well, if we can protect against fraud, and on the other hand, as you say, in a lot of elections now, whether it's government or non-government, organizations are basically competing for the attention of the voter. They're competing with other things. They're possibly competing for the voter because the voter might decide to participate with another group. It's a different way to think about it. I think we will see this. I think we'll see more creative ideas from government and non-government bodies to increase participation. And using electronic voting is part of the enabler, because if we're all just walking into a polling place to vote and we're all voting on paper, this probably doesn't happen.
Now, you mentioned that you've been involved or at least aware of blockchain for 4 or 5 years. What brought you into this world?
Well, like most people, I became aware of it through Bitcoin, and at first got interested in the cryptocurrency, and then like everybody else. And so myself, I've been in software development now for over 3 decades. And for the last couple of decades, I've started a series of companies and built some software companies and helped kind of lead the technology there. So I'm always looking at new things, and certainly, like most people, realized the wide-ranging implications of blockchain. About that time, I first became aware through Bitcoin and began, as I said, have this other problem area that I just personally was concerned about, and quickly saw, and many people have discussed, that voting is kind of a potentially fundamental application that can be implemented on blockchain. That said, I think at NetVote, we've begun to, in engaging with different groups, we've begun to expand some of the areas even related to voting that we're starting to look at that are kind of related, and we hope to help leverage there too into other areas where individuals, need to share data with each other or possibly with an organizing body like the government, but they need privacy protections, and we need to know the data is recorded as we intended and that it's not tampered with. And now voting is taking us into looking into some related spaces too that we hope to provide some capabilities to help for.
That says that NetVote is built on the Citizen Data Network. What is that?
That's what I was just mentioning, is that we built a platform for NetVote. So we've been working on NetVote over 2 years now, and we basically built a platform. And as we started working, and I mean, we've been building it out and kind of gone through some prototypes and then gotten to where, we think we have a good solution now, and it's now available in production, and we intend to have it live on our chain when our chain mainnet launches as well. But what we realized was, in talking to many of the groups we were starting to work with on elections, they began to point out to us related areas that what we had implemented for voting, they started asking, well, wait, we would like to also use it for this. For example, we want a similar capability for government records. We want a similar capability for a lot of elections now have observers in the field who audit elections. So that people started saying, we'd like the same capability to record the auditor observer reports. So we begin to realize the wider applicability of kind of the core functionality that was required for elections and voting. And what we've done is we're now abstracting that out into a more generic layer, which we call the Citizen Data Network. And NetVote is essentially an API layer utilizing this kind of now shareable set of capabilities underneath it. But we're now starting to implement other, I'll just call them APIs or protocols on top of the Citizen Data Network to help people solve these other problems. So for example, the new one we're working on right now that'll be out before the end of the year is going to allow more generic forms. So not just, so instead of just elections or voting, we'll be able to support this use case that I discussed, which is observers in the field who are auditing elections will be able to fill out forms and submit them. And then those will be stamped on the blockchain and can also be privacy protected. And that'll be our second kind of protocol on top of the Citizen Data Network.
And how did you find RChain and get involved in this ecosystem?
It was over a year ago. Someone who we knew became just aware of our project and introduced us to a potential advisor, Lee Carter, who is part of Reflective Ventures. Lee took an interest in our project, and we got to know Lee, and he began to educate us on the benefits of the RChain plan and the RChain implementation. And one thing led to another. Reflective has invested in NetVote, and we have committed to supporting RChain and the co-op as we just did in the election, and also implementing on RChain, which we are actively working on right now. And, we have a great partnership with Govern, which we were introduced to through Reflective.
Okay, well, since I'll be talking to Carl tomorrow, can you talk a little bit about what that relationship entails?
Yeah, at NetVote and with Citizen Data, what we're focused on is providing these kind of solution protocols and having them married then to the blockchain, but making it so that the applications can then be built on top of our protocols. The other systems that might be integrated can be integrated on top. Elections is a space where there is a lot of work to do in enabling and running an election and building the interfaces for, let's say, election administrators, including how they set up an election and how they go through the registration process and how they notify voters and then how they tally votes. There's a lot to be done, and a lot of it is very specific to the type of elections you're doing, the region of the world you're doing it in. So at NetVote, our approach is to provide this protocol layer, but that what we want to do is work with partners who actually have the expertise and provide the full solution, where NetVote is something they utilize, but is just one part of the full solution. And then they provide the services and the full solution to the governing body, or the body running an election in this case. And so Govern and NetVote are a perfect partnership. We're quite lucky to have kind of found each other, I think, and work together very well, because Govern has deep experience and expertise, the founders of Govern, in elections, and are building out a platform, the full solution for elections. And then NetVote has the expertise on the details of how to do secure private elections, and we're building a layer that'll marry it to multiple blockchains and can then just be easily utilized efficiently. So they're kind of the face to the world governance, and we're kind of like the behind the scenes protocol to make it happen and make sure all the voting works.
We were both in the room this week for the Crypto Invest Summit, where Steve Wozniak was asked what best use cases blockchain is going to produce first for mass adoption. And he kind of said, I think there's a lot of different industries. And the very last thing he said was, but I really hope voting is one of them. And I know that's such an important statement, but I know you were there and that was, that hit you. And why do you think he said that? And as well as why is voting so important an issue to be addressed right now?
I think voting is such an important thing because of the worldwide corruption that we've seen. In addition to the fact there's really no standards when we go from one community to the next, whether that's state to state or nation to nation. And I firmly believe that blockchain voting can bring the standards and bring the confidence back into voting so that we know and understand if it is a blockchain play that is certified, that we now have a confident in the turnout of the election.
And tell me a little bit, before we get into the details about what blockchain can do for voting, tell me how Govern came to be in the first place.
Well, Govern partnered up with an organization called Election Trust, which has been running traditional and electronic voting for over 20 years. So we have the process end to end. And I want to clarify, voting, in our opinion, is a one-time activity, where an election is stringing together the whole process of making sure we have the right registered voters, making sure we have primaries that are conducted correctly in accordance with bylaws, the actual election event, and then all the post-election analytics. So we're looking at it from an end-to-end solution, not just from a single activity. We also, because we've teamed up with an organization that's been doing this for so long, we know and understand a lot of the local jurisdiction requirements, whether it's public or private, across the board. So we're not just coming in and creating a voting app. We're coming in and creating a voting solution based on known things.
And when did you start to really think seriously about voting personally?
It's been about a year.
And were there facets of your career before that hinted at that, or is it something that you just realized needed to be addressed?
It was something I definitely needed to be addressed. However, this is brand new to me. I spent 10 years as CIO in banking, so I'm used to a very highly regulated organization. However, this was a brand new thought, and it's largely because we teamed up with the different members of our group that really brought it to life for me.
When did you first become interested in blockchain?
I personally have had a fascination with emerging technologies my entire career. It was probably 2 to 3 years ago, through the emergence and, of course, the whole hype cycle around Bitcoin and realizing, well, that's not really what the whole blockchain movement's about. So probably about a year and a half ago, teaming up with a couple others prior to getting into the voting space, trying to learn more about it and really becoming fascinated by this could be the piece of the puzzle that we're missing as far as making sure things are secure, but also in an open source manner to making sure that it's transparent.
I just finished reading George Gilder's book, Life After Google, which discusses why he thinks Google is going to eventually be broken up or challenged in ways by blockchain that it can't foresee. And he makes the point that the one thing, when you trace from the beginning of the internet through now, the main thing that tech companies have not taken into consideration is security. And that he believes is the fundamental piece of any architecture that's created that needs to be taken into consideration from the beginning, or else you're going to fail. Now, coming from banking, as you do, the company that has the most patents in blockchain right now is Bank of America. How do you foresee blockchain affecting banking, and what is it doing for security overall?
Let me answer the second half of that. What is it doing for security overall? I think the model that we're getting out of blockchain is a completely fresh and brand new model. It's not traditional, well, here we have data storage or we've got the cloud. How can we secure it? We're approaching this with something that is inherently secure, and we have to make sure we follow the proper protocols, proper processes, and make sure that we're not introducing something in the end-to-end solution that is not secure. Now, how will this impact banking? Well, the problem with large organizations is their race to monetize something. If we could slow that down and really say, well, what is the best value? What is the best way to leverage this technology, and the best way that it's going to benefit not just us, not just our, the bottom line shareholder, but actually the community. Can we take banking? Can we take the transactions? Can we use the magical ledger we call blockchain and really make something secure? Now, of course, the problem is profits versus the true value of something. And I think Govern as a startup, we can look at the true value of something without necessarily focusing on the profits. But unfortunately, like everybody else, that is, kind of an end goal for everybody.
Well, I've written a number of business plans for various companies in my own projects over the years. And the one thing you always have to take consideration leading with is how you're going to monetize. I mean, it's so at the front of everything that we think of when we're starting companies. And now, coming from banking, over a decade, as you said, in that industry, are there other people who are thinking along the ways that you're expressing, or do you think that most people are really concerned predominantly about profits?
I think if we take a look at the blue chip companies, I think their underlying fashion or underlying motive is profit. I think if we take a look at some of the smaller organizations, some of the organizations maybe like co-ops, they're out there really to help solve a problem. And I think those are where we're going to find the most innovation, and we're going to find perhaps the biggest leaps versus just a big blue chip company who wants to leverage the blockchain to add one more layer of security or bureaucracy to their systems.
Now, you were part of RChain's voting for the board of directors this week. Can you tell me a little bit about how you got involved with RChain in general, and then more specifically what you did for the voting process?
Govern became involved with RChain through their funding arm, Reflective Partners. We were out looking for different partners to help fund us so we could get off the ground through different seed rounds. And Reflective came to us and was able to work with us. During the process, we learned about the upcoming election. And what better than having one of their own companies that they're helping fund actually help provide the technology for their actual elections. So Govern provided the end-to-end solution for the elections, everything from the creation of the ballot to the tabulation for RChain. Now, we did this in partnership with NetVote, because together we provide the front-end interface, and they provide the ability to actually get in and write to the chain.
Now, one thing I was talking to Jonathan Alexander, the founder of NetVote, yesterday about was voter participation. And he had some interesting ideas about ways of getting more people out to vote, because even if you look at the last presidential election, I think maybe half of Americans voted, if it reached that high. And when you're talking about midterms, when we had an off-year election last year in California, I think 13% of Californians even bothered to vote. So what kind of solutions do you see either Govern or blockchain in general offering for people to get more people involved and engaged in voting?
That's a great question. This is something that I'm probably the most excited about. I got home last night from being on a business trip, and there sat my mail-in ballot. In Washington State, we're 100% mail-in. And I looked at it and said, I got to fill that out. This morning it was still on the table. I know I have to fill it out because I'm going out of town, and I desperately want to participate in this election. If we can move to a true electronic platform, and blockchain offers this ability, I now have that on my phone. I can vote while I'm on my way to the airport. I can vote while I'm sitting waiting for my coffee in the morning. I don't have to worry about where's my paper, where's my stamp. I've got to fill this out. I got to compare it. I now have it in my hands. And the most important thing about that is We can have friendly reminders going to voters. Hey, don't forget to vote. It closes in 4 days. Don't forget to vote. It closes in 24 hours. And obviously with electronic voting, as soon as somebody votes, you no longer have to send them these reminders. On top of that, with my paper ballot, I look at it, now I have to go to the internet and I have to do research on the different issues. When I'm doing a true electronic voting, I'm able to have that in my hand or obviously on the screen. And with dynamic links, I can find out all the information I want, whether it's supplemental to the ballot or whether it's just individual research. The best part about the solution that we're creating is we're hybrid. We're not talking about forcing everybody into a handheld device. We know that that's not going to happen. We're talking about that is just another way to vote. We're able to address the people and say, hey, do you prefer paper? Do you prefer to sit in front of a screen? Or do you prefer mobile? All of this goes into and is into a single system that aggregates everything together. So it's that hybrid voting that's actually going to help drive adoption and use. And I don't know how many people sit out there and say, oh, there's my paper ballot. I just didn't get to the mail. Or worse yet, with traffic, I can't get to the polling site in time to actually do my, cast my ballot. I now have it in my hand.
Right. It's funny. Last night I was actually filling in my mail-in for California, and they went from last year, the Scantron sheet, to now, and actually it's easier to read, but more cumbersome in size paper ballot. And so it seems like in some ways we're moving in the opposite direction, which, on the phone would be so much easier and so much more, people are so much more accustomed to handling data in general that way. Now, that said, this election cycle, and this happens every election, presidential or midterm, but this one seems to be particularly insidious about at least certain counties and states, the ways they're going about voter suppression right now. Do you think that governments, state level, local level, that are particularly interested in not having certain segments of their population, or that are very interested in gerrymandering, problems that we keep seeing over and over again, do you think that they're going to adopt a digital platform?
Yes. Unfortunately, if organizations or state units adopt a digital platform, they could force out some of the populace that perhaps don't feel comfortable or don't want to use electronic and they still want to hold on to the paper. That's why I go back to hybrid. This has to be hybrid, and it has to be hybrid for the next 25, 30 years, because not everybody has a device, not everybody has access to a device. You need to make sure that it's 100% accessible. And I'm not just talking about the United States. I'm talking about worldwide. What is the best way that a user can actually go in and cast their vote? And while we're talking about handheld, with our hybrid system, we're going to be able to take paper ballots right as they're being cast and actually mark those into the blockchain. So paper becomes part of this. It isn't just pushing electronic to paper, but it's also taking paper and pushing it to electronics. But we've got to make sure that we proceed carefully, because we're trying to embrace the populace. We're not trying to segment or count parts of it out.
Now, I was just listening to a news show as I was walking from the coffee shop to talk to you, and there is, I forget the county, it's escaping my mind right now, but a voting population of 13,000 people. The polling place was moved outside of the county limits to make it harder for that population to reach. And then it turns out when the local government sent out the notice about where the polling place was, they put the wrong address. So you have layers of challenges for people to vote. How will blockchain, and you can speak to govern in particular if you have methods, how do you address false information?
So I have to say the old cliche, garbage in, garbage out. If in our solution or in the voter registration or voter notification, they don't properly address an electronic application, or it's not available, or the links don't work, if it's something that the local populace is doing, they can sabotage it, absolutely. We can't necessarily control those analog activities of people. What we can do is make the process transparent. And instead of having to wait for that mail that says, oh, here's where your polling place is, it could be live and dynamic and instant. And perhaps one of the best features is mistakes can be remedied. Do you know how much organizations spend printing material and sending it out just to have to send out a supplemental piece of paper because something's incorrect? And we, of course, all know the benefits of digital updates. Just like in the election we did last week, there is a deadline for changes. We don't want to change something right up to the last second, but we want to make sure that X amount of hours prior to the actual election, everything is 100% frozen. Everything is, because every change you do in an election has to be ratified by a board to make sure, yes, this data is correct, so you don't have a single person going in. Will the blockchain solve bonehead moves by the community to try to marginalize their populace? No, but it will make it more transparent and give greater and easier access to everybody. And by doing it both electronic and paper is going to be the big key there.
Bonehead, that's a good word.
Oh.
That should be applied more often to a lot of what I see.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's malicious or if it's just stupidity. You know, why are we doing this? You know, this is 2018. We should be above this by this point.
Yeah, I agree. You know, unfortunately, I don't want to make this partisan, but you know, there's a trend that the more people vote, the more it leans to one side. So the ways that people go about trying to secure their positions of power are it's frightening. It's frightening. And you're right. We should be above this, especially at a time when all of this information can be quickly checked online. But of course, the next problem is places that people check to see their information and whether or not that's actually true. So fortunately, on our chain and in blockchain in general, we have other companies working on combating false information and stories, and we'll see how that all works together, because I think that will be an integral part of voting systems such as yours moving forward. Now, that said, you've done this election for us. What do you have in the pipeline looking down the road?
I am really excited. We have 5 elections scheduled between now and the end of the year that are all going to be blockchain based. Now, we're talking about both digital and paper elections, but as the tabulations coming through, that information will be stored on the blockchain.
Can you talk about any of the ones that you have?
I can tell you they're private elections, including unions, including public service organizations, and including homeowners associations. I'd rather not say the brands.
Oh, of course. No, it leads to my last question here, which is, are you focused more on smaller organizations and co-ops, and then with the idea of moving to, say, state and perhaps federal elections at some point? Or are you targeting a broad range of voting processes?
We are absolutely focused on the broader spectrum. We're taking our initial elections that we have in the pipeline already, and we're establishing them on the blockchain as basically as early adopters. We're in discussions with multiple state and public organizations for public voting. And the biggest difference in our approach than a lot of companies is we're going to the organization, we're seeing what their process is, and then we're injecting and seeing how we can help, versus just going to an organization saying, here's your brand new way of doing it. Like, wait a second, that doesn't meet the bylaws. That doesn't meet state or local regulations. So we're adapting it towards that. Will blockchain all of a sudden come in and become the next big state referendum and run the election? Probably not. But it's absolutely going to be part of 2019 cycles and taking bits and parts of the election processes and putting them on the blockchain.